Hey, good morning. Welcome to Life Online. We trust you and your family are well. Yesterday we looked at that quote that comes from St. Francis of Assisi. At least it's attributed to him. Preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. And by the way, I don't know how you feel about that. We use it a lot to go ahead and have conversation about that our actions need to back up the kind of words that we use. And by the way, I'm very aware that as a minister of the gospel and as a preacher of the word of God, that my words fall really short unless there's not actions to back that up. And so we first of all preach the gospel through our demeanor, the things that we do and our behaviors. And then it gives us the credibility to go ahead and use words. But even St. Francis understood this. It is said of him by a biographer that his words were neither hollow nor ridiculous, but filled with the power of the Spirit, penetrating the marrow of the heart so that listeners were turned to great amazement. I love that about him. Sometimes St. Francis would go to 5 villages within one day, often preaching outdoors. Maybe he would have been a great preacher during COVID-19 outbreak. But he would stand on a bale of straw or at a granary doorway. And sometimes in the city, he would step up on a box or on steps of a public building. And he would preach to all who would gather in around him. And in fact, sometimes it was said of him that he would become so animated and passionate in his delivery that his feet moved as if he were dancing. So even St. Francis, although this isn't really his quote, but when necessary used words, St. Francis used words. Dwayne Lifton, President Emeritus of Wheaton College, says, "It's simply impossible to preach the gospel without words. The gospel is inherently verbal, and preaching the gospel is inherently verbal behavior." So for those of you who want to go ahead and shrink back in your witness and say, well, I don't give verbal witness, but the witness that I give is with my actions. Listen, you really, that one's not an option for you. By the way, there's probably no one back in the past 50, 60 years, no one understood this when necessary, use words like Billy Graham. Billy Graham understood that it is so vital that all hear the good news. And so he preached, and he preached passionately. And in fact, they will say that in his public crusades, he preached to over 210 million people in 185 different countries and territories. You see, it was deep inside of his heart, this Romans 10:14. How then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how will they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? And so he stepped up to preach and to proclaim the gospel. I love what 2 Timothy 4:2, this is New Living Translation, preach the word of God. And by the way, this is the moment here in Pennsylvania, Delaware District of the Assemblies of God. This is the moment when individuals are ordained, that the Bible moves from a veteran minister and pastor into the hands of the one being ordained, preach the word, and then they grab it and hold on to that. Paul goes on and says, be prepared whether the time is favorable or not. Good times, tough times, we preach the word of God. Patiently correct, rebuke, and encourage your people with good teaching. And this is the message paraphrase of that last portion of the verse. Challenge, warn, and urge your people, and don't ever quit. Just keep it simple. And by the way, this is something for every single one of us who are a believer in Jesus. It's not just that we believe him in our minds, that kind of, and in our hearts, and it's not just that we do our best to show our faith through our behavior, but we've got to tell the story. We've got to tell the story. This is who Jesus is, and this is what he has done for me. So we challenge you, make this day a day where you preach the word of God. Have an awesome day. God bless.